Okay, so from landing the job to leading the team, unleash your emotional intelligence for a thriving career. What are we going to learn about today to help us do this? We're going to talk about what is emotional intelligence, how you can leverage it in your job search and in your career at work, and how you can improve your EQ because it is something you can work on. And then, as I mentioned a few times, we are going to have an audience Q&A. We do have some interactive features of today's webinar. So the first one is right now. If you'd like to include in the chat, I'd love to see what you think. So feel free to add to the chat. What comes to mind when you think of the phrase emotional intelligence? What sort of thoughts come to your mind when we talk about or when you hear the phrase emotional intelligence? Give you just a few minutes, a few seconds rather, to kind of put some things in the chat if you'd like. All right, I'm starting to see some answers come in. When I think about emotional intelligence, it's like the word emotion just is really large and in charge in my mind. Like, what does it mean? Emotions are such a big part of our lives. So certainly emotional intelligence must be a way to kind of work through some of those things. So thank you for putting some of those answers in there. Dr. Travis Bradbury and Jean Greaves are two of the main people behind emotional intelligence research. There are a few researchers out there on this topic, but these two coined the term or coined, kind of the definition of emotional intelligence, which is your ability to recognize and understand emotions and your skill at using this awareness to manage yourself and your relationships with others. Really, what they are saying is that how someone else feels or behaves is out of your control, but we individually can control our responses to how somebody else is behaving. We can work to identify the emotions behind somebody else's behavior. We can work on that on our own. And this gives us a better idea of where somebody else is coming from. It can help shape our interactions and the empathy we have towards somebody else. In researching for this presentation, I looked at a lot of different resources, and Mental Health of America has some really great information. And they said, in regard to people with high emotional intelligence, that tends to mean that those people have strong interpersonal skills, especially in areas, I found this really interesting, especially in areas of conflict management and communication, which are both really crucial skills in the workplace, not only in general, but if you're working in a hybrid or remote environment as well. So basically, being able to self-regulate helps ensure that we're not going to respond impulsively, that we will take some time to think through our decisions without the emotional response to allow us to think through things more objectively. And I'll just personally say that one of the things that I work on is that emotional piece of when something happens or I see something and somebody's frustrated or, something stressful is going on. I really have to think about, I really try to be self-aware, to feel how those emotions or my emotions are impacting the information that I've been given, and really kind of take a step to breathe so that I can respond in the right way. And we're going to talk more about this throughout today's presentation. And I will use myself as an example. But given this definition, there are, kind of four areas that the researchers have outlined in emotional intelligence. And I found this nice infographic from Managing Emotions from Deloitte Consulting. And so I wanted to share it because it sort of really compiles, what each area, each of the four quadrants are. So self-awareness and self-management. So this is the personal side of emotional intelligence, meaning your ability to know and understand and manage yourself. And On the right side, where it's colored in green, is social competence. So it's your ability to understand other people. So that's a social awareness. So there's yourself and your self-awareness and social awareness. And then you can manage yourself, and then relationship management. So these are the four quadrants. And you can see on the slide, the self-awareness. How am I accurately perceiving and understanding my emotions? So this is the piece that really kicks in for me when I feel an emotional response to something or someone. And then I can ask myself, how am I managing these emotions and behavior productively? So things like impulse control, adaptability, transparency, your optimism versus pessimism. Those are some things that you can control as well. And I love the last one in the self-management piece, intentionality and choosing how to act or react. That is, to me, if you can be intentional and choose your reaction to certain things, that is a big key to improving your emotional intelligence. It is what you can control. Okay. Now, for social competence, do you accurately perceive and understand the emotions and behaviors of others? This is where empathy, your service orientation, organizational culture, kind of reading the room kind of comes in to play here. In terms of managing those relationships, do you work well with others and impact others effectively? So what is your teamwork, collaboration, conflict management? Do you have a mentoring mindset or a coaching mindset? How do you build trust with other people? So self-awareness, really, to review, is knowing how you are going to act and react in the moment. Self-management is adapting and directing those actions and reactions in the appropriate way. So this is about you. Social awareness is recognizing and understanding the emotions in others. And relationship management is using the other skills while you are interacting with others. All right. So these are some really, this is a really great infographic. So when you get the recording back, you can screenshot this and, sort of evaluate where you're at as you kind of bring emotional intelligence into your awareness. So this emotional intelligence includes a number of key factors, and some of this is overlapping from the last slide, but here are some characteristics. Obviously, self-awareness we've talked about. Why do you feel these emotions, and recognizing them. Self-regulation, similar to self-management, is being able to better manage your own emotions and impulses, controlling your reactions, staying calm under pressure, and adapting effectively to changing situations. Motivation is another characteristic of emotional intelligence, meaning that you're driven by a strong sense of purpose. You can use your emotions to drive as a driver to achieve your goals and ambitions. I mentioned empathy on the previous slide, and this is something that is a big piece of the relationship part of EQ. It is the capacity to understand and share the feelings of others. You know that saying, put yourself in somebody else's shoes or walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. This really is seeing things from someone else's perspective and feeling concern for their well-being. Again, if I can lean into some of the research that I uncovered on Mental Health of America, operating with empathy and understanding really is another critical part of work culture and teamwork, especially. So if you can attribute someone's behavior to a specific emotion, that's going to help you manage relationships and make others feel heard. Being aware of your own feelings is the first step, because you can help make sure that those feelings don't control you. And when you recognize that, you can make steps or take actions that allow you to respond in a productive way. Social skills is another characteristic involved in EQ, or emotional intelligence, abbreviated as EQ. This means using your awareness and empathy together to navigate social situations. You are relating to others. So if you've ever been to maybe like a networking event, your social skills include applying skills like active listening. So if you're at a networking event, you're asking questions, you're asking clarifying questions, you're really doing some active listening so you can summarize. It is about effective communication and conflict resolution. Okay. All right. So I'm going to pop up a poll. And the poll question is, which of these characteristics feels the easiest for you? Which of these resonates the most to you? Is it self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, or social skills? Feel free to answer the poll. I'll give everyone just a few more seconds. It should have popped up on your screen. All right. So thank you for that. We'll talk about this in the Q&A. Increasing your emotional intelligence does take some time, but there are so many benefits to it. So let's look at how we can leverage EQ during the job search as a benefit to us to finding a job. So there are some key activities during the job search where you can let your EQ shine. Here are 4 ways to consider that you could highlight your emotional intelligence on these components of the job search. So we're going to talk about how you can highlight EQ on your resume, through your personal branding, with networking, and interviewing. So for thinking about our resume, of course, this carries over into interviewing and personal branding, but certain skills that we've talked about already today, like conflict management, teamwork, collaboration from the relationship management quadrant of EQ, you can add to your resume, your skills section, your profile summary. Also, taking initiative like in the self-management quadrant, because employers appreciate seeing these skills. Weaving them throughout your resume on your summary and key skills section can be very helpful. Your online presence, like personal branding exercises, can and should showcase your EQ as well. And when you do that through personal branding, I'm going to show you an example in one of the next slides. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. I did mention active listening, and that is a big part of EQ. And I mentioned it in terms of networking. So starting with your network, talk to people who are doing the type of work that you are doing. Ask questions that show them you are listening and you are genuinely curious about what they have to say. Active listening also carries over into interviewing. So active listening is such a key to emotional intelligence. So during an interview, obviously your listening skills have to be on fire, right? You have to hear and understand the question. So being an active listener in case you need clarification or you need to follow up on anything is important. Keep in mind, too, not just during the interview, but in interview preparation, when you're formulating your responses to those STAR questions, so situation, task, action, and result, keep skills like conflict management, communication, taking initiative, and relationship building in mind when you are thinking of examples to highlight to the employer. Now, I mentioned we're going to go over a few examples. So the first one is already on this slide. You can see a resume summary. So if you read the professional summary in the chat, if you'd like, what are some of the EQ skills highlighted in the summary and core strengths section? I'll give you a little bit to work through that. All right, I'm seeing some come in. Yes, conflict resolution, empathy, collaboration. Yes, people skills. Very good. This is exactly right. So you can just add some of these core skills or strengths that you have in EQ to your resume summary section. All right, here's a personal branding example. We get a lot of you asking for examples of some of the suggestions that we make. And actually, when I was preparing this presentation, LinkedIn released a blog post with the 14 best LinkedIn profile summaries. And as I was reading through those, I found this one. She is a talent acquisition specialist, and there is a lot of EQ flowing through this. Now, One of her key skills that she mentions is communication. She's a very good communicator, and she shares that with undertones of relationship building. Just the way this is written speaks to her self-awareness in her abilities. Look at how she starts her about section. One of my first memories in school is going to a parent-teacher conference in kindergarten and having my teacher tell my parents, Desiree is definitely one of my most talkative. No matter where I move her in class, she communicates with everyone. So this is something that she is communicating. She knows she's a communicator. It has been pointed out to her. It is part of who she is. And this is part of her branding. This is part of her branding. I have the link to this in the resources, so you'll be able to check out the other 13 profile summaries as well. All right. We talked about interviewing. I do want to give an example for an interview as well, because you can also highlight emotional intelligence in your interviews. And I thought this would be a good idea to do. We do have some webinars on using AI in your job search. So I wanted to enlist the help of AI for this exercise as well. And I use Google Gemini. So if you are working on interview prep and you'd like to make sure you are highlighting something like EQ, you can ask a question like this. This is the question I posed to Google Gemini. What is a real world example of a work situation that requires tapping into your emotional intelligence? All right. Gemini said, well, delivering bad news to a colleague. And that is exactly true. That is something that requires a lot of thought. It's an emotional thing. And you can approach this in a number of different ways, but you want to approach it in the best possible way. So this is the scenario. So if you're a project manager, for example, and you just learned a team member's work on part of the project needs to be redone, and you're on a time crunch. Okay. So you're going to have to deliver this news to your colleague. This is something that might make you feel frustrated by the setback and the pressure to deliver your project on time. For the person that you deliver the news to, they might feel embarrassed, disappointed, or defensive. These are anticipatory things that you're thinking about before you start. However, when you are having this conversation, you're going to have to sort of read the person and how they are feeling about this. So here is where emotional intelligence comes in. We've talked about self-awareness. So recognize that you are frustrated about this. Empathy, you have to understand where your colleague is going to be coming from. Self-regulation means that you're going to manage your emotions while and before and after you deliver the news, so it's constructive. How are you going to motivate your colleague to redo this piece, and how are you going to give them the support that they need? And finally, the social skills piece of this, of course, is the communication part. How do you communicate that? So one of the things that I did is I wanted to put together an answer that is going to include self-awareness. Each of these, these 5 different emotional intelligence characteristics. So you might say something like, it was a hard situation in an interview. This is in response to an interview question. If they say, how did you deliver bad news to a colleague? You could say, it was a hard situation because I was working really hard to meet a project deadline. That's the self-awareness. I knew that this would be a tricky conversation to have, and I wanted to handle it well. I took some time to write out some of my concerns and then took a little bit more time to step away from that so that when I came back, I was in a good space to reread what I was planning on saying. I ended up tweaking a few things to ensure the message was going to be delivered in a positive way. That is empathy and self-regulation. Then you could say, we talked about how we could work together to retool the part of the project and that there were some things we could eliminate from my colleague's plate. So there was ample time to rework some of the data. Here's the motivation piece of it. All delivered and communicated effective, that is sensitive to someone's feelings, but also very direct with a plan. Okay. So those are some things that you can do. And what you, of course, some of you may have been to our interview webinars before, but as you're preparing for a webinar, it's important to write out some of these scenarios and practice them. You're not going to read this in an interview. However, it will help you be prepared to answer a question like this. All right. Let's look at this next poll that's going to pop up. How confident are you in your ability to manage your emotions in stressful work situations? So we just had that scenario as a stressful situation. How confident are you in your ability to manage these emotions in stressful work situations? Feel free to answer the poll. Let us know your confidence level here, because we're going to talk next about how we can move this into our day-to-day operations in our careers. Okay. All right. Those answers are coming in. All right. Thanks, everybody. All right. When you work on EQ, career success can follow, because by building strong working relationships, that's going to foster things like collaboration, easier conflict resolution, and teamwork. This is all essential for career advancement as well. Emotional intelligence helps navigate change and overcome challenges in the workplace to make you more adaptable and more resilient. And high EQ leaders are inspirational, they motivate people, and they build trust within their teams. So when you use EQ at work, it will help you be self-motivated. It will increase your self-awareness, which we know is a big theme of EQ. It's going to help boost positivity, increase your empathy, and again, as I mentioned, be adaptable and embrace change. So these are all positive benefits to leaning into and leveraging EQ at work and within your career. When people have EQ at work, it improves communication, it builds relationships, again, it improves performance and helps with career progression. Now, how are you going to do this? If you feel that you need to, if you're not as confident as you'd like to be in growing your EQ, how can you do this? The first thing you do is start with yourself first, the self-awareness and self-reflection piece. Then you want to think about, okay, I've got some team members. Maybe you're a manager and you have direct reports. What are their strengths and weaknesses? Okay. Identify those, whether you have to jot them down, or in your one-on-ones and conversations, just a way so that you can really be in tune with team members' strengths and weaknesses. Be cognizant of giving people a voice and hearing them out. Again, this is where active listening comes in, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in another slide or two. You want to help manage your stress. You want active listening, again, so you can build trust. And you also want to solicit feedback from others to make sure, how you're doing this. So in addition to how we mentioned your self-awareness and self-reflection. So some of these exercises, in order to elevate your self-awareness, of course, that comes from reflection. And those things can be journaling, meditation, even personality assessments can help you identify your strengths and any areas for improvement. Be vulnerable with others. This comes in particularly when you're asking for feedback, I feel like. It is a vulnerable place to be in when you're asking somebody to give you, feedback. Empathy, again, plays into this, and communication as well. So one of the ways that you can show your empathy and communicate more effectively is by asking or practicing clarifying questions so that you can understand other people's perspectives. So you could say something like, could you please clarify what you meant when you said this, whatever that specific point was? A couple other clarifying questions. Can you give me an example to illustrate your point? Let me make sure I'm following you. Are you saying blank? And you can kind of summarize. Could you expand on this point a bit more? Okay. So those are some clarifying questions. They will help you with empathy. They will help make sure that you are communicating effectively. And then, of course, recognizing what other people are doing is also really, really beneficial. Um, if I do want to make another point about your self-awareness and self-reflection. We mentioned thinking about your team members or direct report strengths and weaknesses, but think about yours. Here's the deal. Nobody is good at everything, and that's great. That's okay. Know yourself and when to ask for help or when you can offer help. This is something that fosters that trusting, credible relationship building environment that's collaborative on a team. Um, think about if you ask somebody to help you on a project and they do agree, but they might sound hesitant. What is the emotion that, you're recognizing that hesitancy? Think about, are they feeling overwhelmed or confused? Maybe they're coming from a different background or different experiences than what you have yourself. So addressing that, validating it before you move forward can really go a long way as well. All right. Okay, so I did want to share. I actually have attended a few workshops on EQ myself, and these are books that are continually recommended. Emotional Intelligence 2.0 is by Dr. Travis Bradberry and Dr. Gene Greaves, who I mentioned at the beginning. Emotional Agility. Brene Brown has The Power of Vulnerability and Dare to Lead. And Stephen Covey, Speed of Trust. So these are books that you can find at your library, on Amazon. And also, since many of us like podcasts as well, I love 10% Happier. Dan Harris used to be on Good Morning America Weekend, I think. And now his business is 10% Happier. It's great, great meditations, great ideas and strategies here. The Happiness Lab, and Being Well. So those are some podcasts that you can check out. All right. So what do we do going forward? First, I think it's important, really, when thinking about this topic, depending on where your knowledge of emotional intelligence is, might require a bit more research. It might require some reading. It might require some listening. So read some books, read a book, listen to a podcast. Think about what pieces or what characteristics of EQ you have really as strengths and areas that you might like to improve. Then you're going to illustrate it in places like your resume, like we talked about, on your LinkedIn profile, perhaps any other personal branding that you did, and vocalizing those things in your elevator pitches or during your interview when you're interviewing for a job. All of those things, these 4 steps will help you be able to, kind of take this concept of emotional intelligence and really, perform some actionable items to enhance your job search and your career progression. All right, as promised, we will have some questions in a second. We're sending a recording and the resources used in this presentation, so you'll have that shortly. Please check out the FlexJobs.com blog for more information on EQ or any other aspects of your job search. That's a really, deep resource on the website. You can find so many articles there. So I encourage you to check that out. All right, everybody. So now what we're going to do is let's go ahead and get to our questions. Hey, all, it's Tony here to answer your questions. And just a note on the polls, thank you for doing those. It seems as though empathy and self-awareness are the 2 characteristics that feel the easiest for us. I think that makes a ton of sense coming from a job seeker's perspective, right? Because if we've been in a job search, we know that it's really hard. So that empathy piece of it, and just being aware of yourself and your emotions is probably pretty natural, or feels pretty natural based on the situation of finding a job. And almost 50% of us are somewhat confident in our ability to manage our emotions in stressful work situations, and 26%, so about 75%, are either somewhat confident or very confident, which is really good. because as we know, there tend to be challenging situations at work. So let's see what we have for questions here. I keep hearing that we need to show, not tell, on our resumes and other job application materials using quantities measures. How can we demonstrate EQ on our application materials when it's not something quantifiable and vignettes take space? All right. Well, yes, employers prefer, people like to see quantifiable results for the work that you've done. Results, impact, accomplishments. That is true. Not every bullet on your resume needs to have a quantifiable result. And so that does give you a little bit of freedom and permission to be able to, highlight some of these skills in EQ. And of course, on other application materials, if you're writing a cover letter, you have some additional space aside from what's on your resume. You have your LinkedIn profile, which we also talked about in the presentation. So those are some things that I would think about. The example that we gave in the presentation, we used an example from your resume profile summary or professional summary. So, that section at the top of your resume ahead of your work experience is a really great place to use some of these key emotional intelligence keywords, particularly if you're finding any of them on the job description. And that is an area that you can take time to include in that part of your application materials. Also, I know that some job applications on the company pages, when you're filling those out, will have a section. So you'll upload your resume and it parses into all of those boxes, text boxes for your work experience, etc. There are on for some jobs, I've seen this really more frequently lately, a section that says add your skills. And you could type in any word that's a skill really, and most of the time they pop up. So that is a place in your application materials that you could also add some of these EQ skills to enhance what you're including on your application. How would you recommend that we build our EQ skills, especially those skills that are most relevant to remote work? This is a great question. And this really, emotional intelligence, I feel like, is not something that we've talked about a lot. It's been around and it's sort of been in the periphery of, job searching and careers, but it feels like, kind of picking up some steam, and some of these skills are really important, particularly because many more of us now are working in a hybrid or remote environment. So, this requires some self reflection to start. So, which is going to help you with your self awareness. So, you just need to think about what happens at work if, I turn in a project, or I submit an idea, or you put your work out there in front of other people, and somebody says something about it, gives you feedback. And the feedback might be great. The feedback might be, really helpful, constructive feedback. But sometimes that makes people feel a certain way. It might make people feel defensive. It might make them feel like their time was wasted. It might raise up all different types of emotions based on something that somebody says. So, do you see any patterns or triggers in your behaviors or your emotional response to certain events at work? And I think journaling, which we talked briefly about, is a really helpful tool for you to do this self awareness. I think it works really well if you're trying to, improve the amount of nutrients that you're eating, if you're trying to track and keep a nutrition log. All of those things can help you be more aware of, sort of what your emotional reactions are. So I think that's one thing that you can do. I think that, empathy, most of us said that that was pretty easy for us, but just continually, leaning into understanding things from another person's perspective. I think in terms of the social relationships or social skills that you have, challenge yourself to, maybe meet with some more team members outside of team meetings. Work on the way that you communicate with people. Ask specifically, how do you like to be communicated with? Be assertive in your reaching out to others, be diplomatic, make sure that you are aware of how you respond to those things. It's all tied together: self awareness, self regulation, social skills, and so on. So, those are some things that pop to my mind. I think that reading or listening to podcasts on this topic can really be insightful. And even if you pick up one or two little tidbits, can be really helpful for you to sort of facilitate change in an area that you'd like to make stronger. Let's see. Is there a difference in what to stress when applying for a remote job as opposed to an on-site job? In terms of emotional intelligence, not necessarily. I think what you need to pay attention to in terms of emotional intelligence skills that you're going to use on your job application is the job description. The same is true for any of the other skills that you see in a job description. If you're asking in general about skills in terms of applying for a remote job versus an on site job. We do have some webinars on writing your resume for a remote job that I recommend. I think it's important to highlight skills like communication, problem solving, your technology know how. You certainly don't need to be an expert in technology, but you do need to know how to use it in a remote work environment. You also want to highlight any remote work experience you have for those remote work applications as well. Let's see. What are some suggestions on how to provide conflict resolution uh, or use emotional intelligence when handling power dynamics and toxic behavior from a supervisor without losing your professionalism and integrity? Well, I think that self awareness is going to come in here and self regulation, right? It's not going to be very beneficial if you are responding in an emotional way, maybe mad, angry, where your emotions are really heightened. Being calm is really helpful. Also, I think, one of the sayings or phrases that I really like is remove the emotion from it. And here I am talking about emotional intelligence and your emotions, and they're a big part of what we do, which is so true. But in situations that are difficult or toxic, sometimes the way we respond to those situations, our emotions impact our response. And if it was a situation where we were able to regulate those emotions, we would be able to be more objective and maybe see things a little bit easier from another perspective. I think also one of the things that you could do is think about and understand the power dynamics that are at play, because that can give you insight into why somebody is behaving the way they are. One of the things that you can control in a situation like this is the way that you communicate, the boundaries that you have set, and also, figuring out what battles are worth leaning into and which ones are not. Because sometimes it might be that something just isn't worth the additional time and energy. I always tell my kids, like, when they're mad at something about a situation or at somebody, it's sort of like, the situation has happened, it's over. It takes so much energy to hang on to that frustration, that anger, all of those things than than the energy it would take to just sort of release that in a journal or in some other way, talking about it and moving on. You can get stuck in a place where you hang around toxic, negative situations for too long. And I think that that takes up a lot of our energy and makes it harder to do some of these other things. And so it really takes, of course, it takes motivation, but to me, it takes a lot of discipline and the to be able to regulate yourself. And of course, it's a constant level of self awareness. And so you have to be conscious of these things and then, try them. Maybe working on this or noticing some of this in a relationship that you have outside of work too. Maybe one that sometimes is challenging or not challenging, but occasionally there's conflict. This can help in that realm as well. As an introvert, I really struggle with handling conflicts or dealing with difficult clients. How do you think I can improve that? I think that there are a lot of really great strengths that introverts can lean into, particularly with conflict. Because one of the things that introverts tend to do is be very thoughtful and thorough in thinking through a situation before responding. And so I think actually that you have the ability to be more self-regulating in terms of the way that you process information. And so I think reframing how you're being an introvert allows you to handle conflicts or difficult clients is done in a way with the strengths of being an introvert, which is a very thoughtful, um, diligent, giving due process to situations, which then can help you in the relationship building or relationship repair with somebody that you're in conflict with or with a difficult client. That certainly is some of my opinion, but I think that you can lean into that. Let's see. I have an MS in conflict resolution and resolution. Can you suggest any phrases that I can use for my job search on the FlexJobs site? I continue to get administrative jobs in my result feed. Yeah, I'm just going to recommend too that you reach out to client services. You can do that via chat on the site because they can really do a lot to help maximize your FlexJobs membership. Now, I would use I would think about the skills that you want to utilize in the job that you hope to land. So if conflict resolution is one of those skills, I would not worry about job titles. So I would use the phrase conflict resolution with quotation marks. If you would like to do negotiation, I would use negotiation as another search term. You could use people management. You could use change management. I think that a lot of times in organizations that have change management, there is some conflict and resolution that needs to be had. You could even look into operations type roles. So those are some ideas I have for you there. Let's see. Where does honesty stand in workplace relationships? I like the phrase honesty is always the best policy. Um, I think personally those are the values that I live by. It might not be the same for everybody, but I don't see a benefit of not being honest with somebody that you work with. It is very difficult to maintain EQ when let go from employment without just cause. Any advice on how this area? I'm not sure. Okay, so what I would do here is if you certainly when you are let go, whether you are fired or laid off, this is something that you are going to be aware of some emotions that happen because it is a very difficult situation. And so you need to process that. You need to allow yourself to grieve, to try to personally understand why this might have happened. You need to lean into your support system. You need to try to work through this situation and this energy that is very draining so that you can move on to the next best thing. This is going to take a different amount of time for a lot of people, for everybody. But eventually, you want to be in a space where you can talk about this without the anger, the sadness, the grief sort of showing through, particularly when you are in your next job search. So Um, that's all of our time today. I hope this was helpful. Again, you will be getting a copy of the recording within the next few days. We are here tomorrow and Thursday with a handful more webinars. So we hope to see you in Big Marker. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and we will be back tomorrow morning. Bye.